What's up everybody, I'm Will the headphone guy here at HiFi Buys in Atlanta, the representative for our headphone bar. And today we're gonna be taking a look at a new product from Meze, the Poet, which is a $2,000 open back entry to their collection that uses the same driver technology as the Elite, Empyrean 2, and Lyric. Now these are some beautiful headphones, but do they sound as beautiful as they look? That is the question that I intend to answer today, so come with me on this journey of discovery and let's find out if these headphones are right for you. All right. What's in the box? What's in the box? What's in the box? There's actually not that many accessories included, but I don't think that's a bad thing because they've leaned into the quality of said accessories. So you start out with this very nice ABS hard plastic case, which comes with a, custom cutout where the headphones lie when you unbox them. And then on top of that, it comes with this nice leather packaging for the cable. And the cable that this thing includes is simply fantastic. I mean, Meze is very well known for their cable quality, but this included cable is, to me, simply breathtaking. It's beautiful, fully woven, pure copper. The whole thing is fantastic, and it is pretty freaking long. Like, in terms of usage, you're gonna get a lot of mileage out of this thing. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't include a 3.5 millimeter jack. You would have to either adapt this or get a different cable for that. In general, that's not going to be a problem because most of the DACs and amps you're going to be using this with, especially if you're using this in a desktop setting, which is what I would suggest, they're gonna have a 1/4-inch jack and you'll be just fine. But it is a little unfortunate that there's no conversion option included in the box, but it's also not really a problem because you can just replace the cable with any cable that supports a dual 3.5 millimeter output to the headphones, which I really love that about Meze, them keeping it nice and consistent until you get into the neighborhood of something like the Empyrean 2, which uses mini XLR instead of 3.5 millimeter. But overall, almost all of their headphones use this same exact connection method, and so you have a lot of options when it comes to cables, and on top of that, Meze's cables are compatible with other brands of headphones that use dual 3.5 millimeter, like HiFi, which unfortunately one of HiFi's worst qualities is their cable selection. So thankfully, being able to replace that with a wonderful cable like this, very nice. You also get some really nice reading materials. So you have your warranty card and then you have this little booklet. And this little booklet is honestly kind of nice. It reminds me of a coffee table style book where you have a bunch of different photography and information about the headphones. But some of my favorite parts of this are actually that they get into the design of the driver itself. They have a bunch of really nice photography about how it works. And I think this actually brings us perfectly into talking about what the driver in these headphones even is. So let's talk about specifications. Now, they are of course open back and have an oval shaped ear cup, which is very comfortable to wear, and their frequency range is 4 Hertz to 96 kilohertz. So it'll go nice and low and extend nice and high. Though I will admit, when it goes down to those sub frequencies, it is a little bit thin, and when it goes up to those high frequencies, it's a little bit accentuated, but we'll get into all of that when we talk about how these actually sound later in this video. In terms of total harmonic distortion, it's less than 0.05%, which is completely imperceptible, so not an issue. They have an impedance of 55 ohms and a sensitivity of 101 decibels per milliwatt at 1 kilohertz, which means that they'll work with almost any DAC and amp and aren't too power hungry in general. You can even use them with a cell phone, though you still won't be getting the full potential out of them in that scenario. Now, these guys use the Renario Isodynamic Hybrid Array M26 driver, which is similar to the driver included in stuff like the Meze Empyrean 2, the Elite, and the Lyric, though it is a different generation of that driver technology. So it is distinct even though it is a similar technology. These headphones utilize a planar magnetic style hybrid array driver. What that means is that the driver is planar magnetic in function. It is a thin membrane that has a trace over it made of metal, and then it vibrates between 2 sets of magnets. However, what makes it a hybrid is that it has 2 types of coils on the same diaphragm. You have a switchback coil at the top, which is a larger surface area that moves back and forth, and that helps to reproduce bass tones, whereas when you go to the spiral coil that is centered around the eardrum, you get better precision when it comes to the high-end reproduction. direction. This is the style of driver that Meze has used in all of their highest end headphones for quite some time, and it is a collaboration with the Ukrainian company Renario Isodynamics, and so it's very cool to see Meze working across the industry on something like this technology. Planar magnetics have existed for a long time, and there are a million different types of them, but what Meze is doing here is incredibly interesting and creative and genuinely makes me excited every time they release a new product. Okay, so moving on from driver design, let's talk about the actual build of these headphones. Now, the build is genuinely fantastic. Meze consistently impresses me every single time that they release a new product. All of their stuff from the lowest end to their highest end is impeccably built. And this is no exception. I mean, first of all, everything is extremely high quality and machined, made of nice metal, but on top of that, every single part of this is serviceable. So that means that this entire headphone can be disassembled down to the level of the actual driver. Like, the driver itself can literally be separated into its disparate parts and you could replace the diaphragm. It is crazy how serviceable these headphones are, and I can't think of any other brand that is doing something as incredible as this in terms of allowing service to their headphones. What that means for me is that this headphone, which costs $2,000, which is a good $1,000 less than the Empyrean 2 and substantially less than the Elite, allows you to actually own it for the rest of your life. If any part of this breaks, you can get it replaced, which is just simply not true with some other headphones in this price range. So I like to think of this as a lifetime style investment, and that is a really cool feature to have because there's just not a lot of other companies that are doing something like this. In terms of functionality, this thing is also fantastic. First of all, the headband situation is one of my favorites in the business. You have this really, really nice sort of suspension headband style, which has two wires that connect the ear cups together that add the tension, and then this suspension band is what goes over your head and allows it to sort of rest and take a lot of the weight and distribute it over a larger area, which makes it more comfortable. On top of that, they are infinitely adjustable, meaning that there's no step system. Instead, these beautifully machined parts allow you to smoothly change the exact balance of where this sits on your head. Now, there's also this wonderful magnetic ear cup design. So this allows you to simply remove the ear cups and replace it just like that. So if you buy different ear cups or want to replace them with just brand new pads after using them for a while, it is extremely easy to do so. But this magnetic design also has a functional advantage as well in terms of the sound quality, because it is redirecting some of that magnetic interference that you're going to be getting off of the permanent magnets that make the driver work back into the driver and allowing the magnets to push even harder against the diaphragm and give you a better sound. You also have 360-degree swivel, which allows you to wear these very comfortably for extremely long periods of time. They don't really squeeze your head in any particular direction, which is very nice in my opinion. Unfortunately, there is a small issue with the adjustment, which is when you want to put them back into the wonderful case they come with, you have to close them as much as possible. You can't leave them at the length that they were adjusted to fit your head. So the case isn't super useful when you're like actively using these. I would say it's more for long-term storage, or if you're traveling somewhere, it would be extremely useful. But you can't actually put them back in without closing them, so it's a little frustrating. Altogether, the functionality and build of these headphones is top tier and genuinely unmatched by, I think, just about anybody else in the industry. Focal gets close at certain times, but I would argue that this is even better than some of the best stuff Focal makes, and that's really saying something. All right, so now the moment you've been waiting for. Let's talk about how these actually sound. Now, for $2,000, I have to say, they sound very pleasant. They're extremely nice, but they aren't my preferred tuning, which is unfortunate. Generally speaking, I like a nice flat headphone that has a slight V to it. I like a good sub bass, and I like a nice sparkle in the highs. And this has both of those, but it seems to be primarily mid-forward in terms of the mid-bass, not the actual mids. Vocals can be slightly receded, but not so much that it becomes like a problem. It just makes them a little bit more toned down and not as in your face, which can be great, especially if you like to listen to music that isn't quite as well mixed and might have shouty vocals. This will fix that problem. The soundstage in these guys is nice and open, but not exceptionally so for a headphone at this price point. I would say that if you like soundstage, you're gonna definitely be satisfied here, but if you're looking for something that's absolutely exceptional, this isn't going to quite do the job for you. The bass extension is nice and deep, and their actual measurements show that it goes all the way down to 9 hertz with a peak of 96 kilohertz. So it's got quite the frequency range, but what it does with that frequency range is a bit weird. So the low and sub bass is going to be totally fine, but not exceptional. Whereas the mid bass is going to have a strange bump that can actually be really nice depending on the style of music that you're listening to and the kind of tuning you prefer. For me, I like that bump to be a little bit lower, down towards the sub bass, to give a little bit more rumble to the music that I enjoy, but that mid bass bump is going to be fantastic for stuff like classic rock. On the high end, these definitely replicate the general idea of Meze's tuning, which means that they have a high-end sparkle above 12 kilohertz that's going to be pushed up slightly, which can sometimes become shrill on certain people's ears, but generally speaking allows you to have a larger feeling of airiness and a nice sort of shimmer to the sound. Now, for me, I do hear at approximately 10 kilohertz or so a bit of a sharp bump in the treble. Now, this is something that generally doesn't show up on measurements, so I think it depends dramatically based on your head shape and the shape of your ears and the tunnel and everything like that. Everything with headphones like this is going to be extremely subjective, not only due to your literal preferences, but actually the shape of your head and ears affects the sound of the drivers directly. There's a wonderful video from headphones.com that talked about that previously if you'd like to see that. For you personally, it might not be an issue, but you really won't know that unless you listen to them, which is a very important part of this process. Now, I had a lot of music that I listened to on these headphones when I was testing them, but there were 3 specific songs that I wrote down notes about because I thought it was interesting the way that it handled them. So the first song I want to talk about is The Hound and the Fox by I the Mighty, and this is specifically the oil and water version, not the connector version. They are 2 very different songs, so if you check out this song, one of them is going to be like a jazz thing, which is what I'm talking about, and the other one is like a pop punk emo situation, which is also fantastic, but not what I'm referencing for this video. On this song, there is a person singing kind of directly right in the middle, and then you have a nice upright bass sound that's happening throughout and some trumpets and different things like that. On the Poet, I noticed that the voice sounds utterly fantastic. It's really nice. It is relatively present, but not as forward as some other headphones that I tried, which I think was kind of nice. This headphone did very well with that jazzy sort of vibe. It allowed me to have, you know, a little bit more mid-bass forward, which was definitely nice on the upright bass, and then those high frequencies allowed you to hear sort of the plucking of the strings very well, or when the trumpets come in later, they sound incredibly good. There's also a piano in the background of this song that I didn't hear as well on other headphones, but on the Poet, it jumped out more, and I think that has to do a little bit with their presentation of the mids. So overall, the Poets did a fantastic job with this song. Second up is gonna be the song Soil by Cosmo Sheldrake, and this is a very interesting song that has a lot of different things happening. Cosmo Sheldrake in general likes to rely on a lot of Foley sounds, which is sounds that are recorded out in nature or whatever, and that allows you to have these really interesting, detailed, you know, real recordings mixed into the music. On this song, overall, I noticed that there was relatively good separation to the various voices, but even though Meze does push that 12 kilohertz range, I found that it was a bit recessed in terms of the high-end detail. It was missing that sort of high-end sparkle that I was getting from something like the HiFi Arias, which are my preferred tuning. In terms of the bass response, I did find that these are good, but not quite what I'm looking for on that particular song. So the song has this nice low rumbling bass that comes in and accentuates sort of the rest of the song, and that gets lost a little bit behind the mid-bass bump that the Poet has. But all of these issues are actually extremely nitpicky. It's not necessarily like there is a huge difference where you're completely losing the sub bass or something like that, but it's definitely not my preference either, at least on this kind of music. The third song is going to be Spanish Moss by Of the Trees. This song is an electronic song that's a bit of a torture test for these headphones. It has very interesting granular synthesis that was used to create the actual sub-bass notes that are happening, so you get these very interesting high-end frequencies that go on top of the low rumbling bass. In these headphones, I found that this song in particular had some very shrill moments and was kind of hard to listen to even at a reasonable volume. It was that 7 to 10 kilohertz range that was killing me on either the bass itself with the high-end frequencies or the sound of the various drums, especially hi-hats, were just very sharp and stood out a lot. When it comes to the low-end bass in Spanish Moss, it has this really, really nice, very low sub that's happening, and it's one of the reasons I like listening to that song to test various systems, because you get both this extremely low rumble and a very nice, clear top-end sort of happening at the same time, and a good system can replicate that extremely well. These headphones did an okay job with it, but not great. The emphasis on mid-bass meant that that low rumble went underneath where the actual bump is and made it sound a little bit weaker than it should have. In a lot of electronic music, you'll usually have a sort of stair-stepping of like a mid frequency that gets lower and lower and lower, and then it hits you with this nice like rumble all of a sudden, and it'll really push and give you like a nice crescendo. With these guys, you got the mid bass nice and powerful, but then it would go to that, you know, low punchy part and just not quite have the amount of push that I would like to hear out of it in general. So the Poet can represent those low tones, certainly, just not as proudly as I would prefer. So at the end of the day, who is the Meze Poet for? In my opinion, the Meze Poet is for people that enjoy stuff like classical rock or jazz or those kind of genres that are going to respond well to that bump at the mid bass and that nice sparkle in the highs. Folk music especially, one of my favorite bands being the Oh Hellos, sounds incredible on these headphones, so I'm very happy about that. If you like to chill out at home with a nice glass of iced tea or some whiskey, these are going to be a great thing to sit there and just listen to music for hours. They're incredibly comfortable and incredibly pleasant sounding. Now, there are the drawbacks that I've talked about, but at the end of the day, those are kind of fixable as well. These headphones do respond well to EQ, and I actually found on the HiFi Zendak 2, when the X-Bass setting was turned on, 2 of the 3 available X-Bass settings actually made this sound even better to me and brought in the sub-bass to the degree that I actually was looking for, which meant that these were able to be enjoyed at a lower volume, which also fixed the problem of them being shrill at those higher frequencies for me. So it was kind of a win-win. So because of that, these can be tuned to fit basically any preference, though you have to go through that extra step of EQing. But why would you do that when you could just buy a pair of headphones that will maybe fit your preferences more? And here lies an even more important feature, in my opinion. You could buy a pair of headphones that fits your preferences more, but this pair of headphones is genuinely going to last you the rest of your life. Sure, $2,000 is a lot to spend on a pair of headphones, but these are completely serviceable and completely repairable, which means these are going to last you for the rest of your life. There are very few times nowadays where you can actually invest a large sum of money like this and genuinely get a product that isn't meant to fail within a year or two. And that's what I love to see from Meze. They seem to have a very genuine connection with the idea of creating stuff that is meant to last a lifetime, and I think that is admirable. So my suggestion to you is, if these sound good, definitely consider giving them a try. But if you really want to know whether or not these are for you, you need to listen to them. And that is where something like the headphone bar here at HiFi Buys becomes insanely important. We have a selection of a bunch of different headphones from a bunch of different manufacturers at an insane amount of price points, and you can listen to each headphone in person in a nice environment and actually test it both against other headphones and against different DACs and amps, and really get an idea of what you enjoy when it comes to a type of headphone. The headphone hobby in general is just incredibly subjective. No two people hear a headphone the same exact way, and so getting the opportunity to go to a physical space or an event, something like Can Jam, or a store here like HiFi Buys in Atlanta, and actually get to check out multiple headphones, that is going to be the key to actually finding something that you enjoy, whether it's something like this or something like this. Buying them online and returning them every single time you want to listen to a different headphone is just not the same as being able to go to a store and genuinely A/B a bunch of different headphones against one another. We actively have people all the time who come in here thinking that they want one specific headphone, and then they listen to all of the different ones and find out, oh, actually, I prefer this headphone. The only way you're gonna really find the headphone that is right for you is by actively listening to it. So throw out all those reviews you've seen online, including this one, and just go somewhere where you can actually listen to them. Like here at HiFi Buys in Atlanta next time you're in town. Come and give us a visit, we'd love to have you, and until then, enjoy the music.